Thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order for this morning. We have guests with us this morning from the Department of Energy. And I will begin the meeting with introductions, please, of our members, beginning with Mr. Epstein.
Good morning, Howard Epstein, MLA, Halifax, Chebucto.
Good morning, Matt Wynot, MLA, Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Good morning, Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville, Cobequid.
Brian Scabar, MLA, Cumberland North.
Leonard Pereira, Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Keith Caldwell, MLA, Preston.
Alan McMaster, representing Inverness.
Good morning, Cecil Clark, MLA, Cape Breton North.
Diana Whalen, MLA for Halifax, Clayton Park, and Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Terry Spicer, Assistant Auditor General.
Darlene Henry, Committee Clerk.
Richard Penny, Acting Manager of Energy Markets for Department of Energy.
Murray Coolican, Deputy Minister of Energy.
And Scott McCombs, the Director of Energy Markets, Nova Scotia Department of Energy.
Well, thank you very much to our guests and welcome. I'd like to begin, as we usually do, with an opening statement, if we could, from Mr. Coolican and on behalf of your department.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments before we move to questions. I didn't realize when I was here back in June that I'd be back here again so soon, and I'm sorry that Nancy Vanstone isn't back with me to share the load, but I'll try and see what I can do. I am privileged to work with Scott and Richard on a regular basis, and I think the government is well served by the officials in the Department of Energy, and Scott and Richard are two examples of some of the best in the department. They've done a lot of work recently, particularly around the renewable electricity plan, and I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit in the question and answer. The invitation that we received specifically referenced a discussion on future power rate increases, and that really sets the stage for and is the reason for the direction the government is taking in regards to Nova Scotia's long-term energy portfolio. The government has said the fiscal path the province is on is not sustainable and we need to get back to balance. The same thing can be said about our energy supply. It is currently not sustainable, and we need to ensure that we have balance in our energy portfolio. When it comes to power rate increases, it's difficult to predict the future, but there are a few things that we do know that place a responsibility on government to plan for the longer term and adopt a path that provides a secure, sustainable, and affordable electricity supply into the future. That is what we are doing with the Renewable Electricity Plan released in April and the subsequent policy decisions that have been made since that time. We know the price of coal will continue to escalate given the ever-increasing demand from China and the cost of emission controls to meet environmental standards. Using cleaner, lower sulfur coal to meet environmental targets increases operating costs. These are things we know. We understand the challenges and issues associated with energy security given our reliance on imported coal, which makes us vulnerable to market price fluctuations and supply. It also puts us in a difficult position in meeting our environmental emission targets. Supply and emissions, very real issues, and we need a plan to deal with them. The lowest cost long-term option to meet our supply needs and environmental targets is moving toward renewable sources of energy as outlined in the Renewable Electricity Plan. In the plan, Nova Scotia has set the most aggressive renewable energy targets in Canada and some of the most aggressive in the world in committing to be producing 25% renewable electricity by 2015 and 40% by 2020. It's also important to think about where we come from in our large dependence on coal. Other provinces across Canada with different energy makeups don't have as significant a challenge as we do in reaching such strong renewable targets. The Integrated Resource Plan filed with the Utilities and Review Board also identifies renewable energy sources as a cost-effective and flexible means of meeting future electricity demand and air emission requirements in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia Power works jointly with the board, consultants, government, environmental organizations, and customers to model the long-term electricity demands for Nova Scotia and then develop scenarios to help the utility determine the best way to meet that demand. This IRP process supports the path the government is taking. The cost of not doing anything is greater, and it compromises our energy security as a province. The price of solid fuels is projected to increase while air emission caps are being lowered. The supply is not local. The benefit is going elsewhere. We will need to meet increasingly stringent environmental targets. Electricity rates are increasing as a result of the global reality we are living in. Electricity prices will increase more over the long term, and we will be in a much more difficult spot in relation to energy security and emission targets if we do not take a renewable approach. The province is in a transition between coal dependence and moving to renewable sources of energy that provide greater stability to Nova Scotians in terms of price and supply. As the price of coal is projected to continue to increase, the price of wind and other renewables is constant. The transition includes the upfront capital costs involved in building renewable energy projects. Still, during this period, Nova Scotians are being employed and are directly benefiting. We are trying to balance opportunity and affordability. That balance is behind our most recent energy-related policy announcement, our new renewable electricity regulations, and the accompanying community-based feed-in tariff. These regulations provide the support and incentives for independent power producers, communities, and not-for-profit groups to get involved in developing community-based renewable energy projects. We are trying to achieve diversity of supply and stability of rates. While we cannot predict future energy pricing with certainty, we can forecast where we anticipate energy supply and demand to be and chart a path to ensure our supply is sustainable, secure, meets environmental standards, and provides more price stability for consumers. There are costs associated with moving in this direction, especially up front. We expect an increase of 1% to 2% per year on electricity bills in the short term as a result of our renewable direction. But in the long run, Nova Scotia will be better off. We will have a far more diverse, secure energy supply on fixed price contracts that will help stabilize rates. I'll end there and try to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Cooligan. And we will begin our first round of 20 minutes with each of the caucuses. We'll begin with Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just a couple of quick questions. What does Nova Scotia Power pay to the renewable energy, the wind generators, or anyone else that sells power to Nova Scotia Power? What do they pay them per kilowatt hour?
Those are contracts between the independent power producers and Nova Scotia Power. I don't have the details on those prices. They are the result of competitive processes that have taken place to ensure that they're the lowest cost options that are available.
And it's my understanding, talking to the renewable energy people, that substantially less than Nova Scotia Power charges the consumer. Is that correct?
Well, the price that the consumer pays is made up of a lot of different charges, including distribution and transmission costs. So it's a question of for an independent power producer who is supplying electricity to Nova Scotia Power, it's it's at the spot where either where there's a distribution or transmission connect, and then you have to have a whole system to move that, and there's a cost related to that. In the same way, if you look at the cost of the generation of what Nova Scotia Power is generating through its coal plants or its other facilities, that cost is lower than the cost to the consumer because of all the costs of transmission and distribution.
I understand that. And in your new renewable energy program, are you going to allow the renewable energy companies to sell directly to the consumer?
No.
Why is that?
Well, there are two aspects of electricity that are important. One is supply, and the other is the duty to serve. And as consumers, we all want, when the switch is turned on, we want the lights to come on, and there's a cost associated with that, and there's a whole system that needs to be in place that allows that to happen, and that's an obligation that we're maintaining on Nova Scotia Power. So, for example, if there's a renewable operator with a wind turbine, and the wind isn't blowing, and he's not supplying the customers with wind at that point, who has the responsibility to do that? And it's Nova Scotia Power.
At the present time, under the monopoly situation they have, correct?
It's a regulated situation where Nova Scotia Power supplies all, with the exception of some of the municipal utilities in the province.
Yeah, basically a monopoly, as we're talking about, that was set up by a previous government. I've talked to some of the renewable energy people, and they have solutions for that problem. And have those been, has your department discussed that with any of the renewable energy people?
We've been talking extensively with renewable energy people as we develop the policies that we're putting forward. But there are a number of jurisdictions over the last 15 or 20 years in the electricity business who've gone to an open market. In most of those jurisdictions, in fact, I think all of those jurisdictions, costs have gone up at a greater rate than where utilities are regulated. And the government's view is that a deregulated market is not the right direction for consumers.
You indicated in your opening remarks, I believe you said 1 or 2% increase in power rates for renewable energy to the way you're planning. Did I hear that correctly? Am I quoting it properly? Will that be in addition to any increases Nova Scotia Power already has or applied for?
Nova Scotia Power is not applying for a rate increase at the moment. They're involved in a fuel adjustment mechanism hearing, which is going to result in an increase as a result of fuel. But we expect overall that the impact of the renewables will be 1 to 2% above other reasons for Nova Scotia Power, or either through fuel adjustment increases or other increases they might require. The other example is the demand side management charge, which is resulting in a 2% increase as well.
Isn't it true also that typically renewable energy, such as windmills or other types of renewable energy such as that, are pretty long-term fixed costs?
Yes.
So in other words, once you get them up and operating, you won't be faced with rate increases from them as you would from a fuel that you discussed in your opening comments here. We're open to cost of coal or oil, whatever is being used. So those costs will go away. Increases if we could be all renewable, and that's not practical, I know that. But
costs don't go away, but it's fixed. It's stable, yeah.
It's stable. So in order to generate a good, solid economy in Nova Scotia, we need stable, reasonably priced electricity, and you said that in your open statement. I couldn't agree more. So why why isn't the government really pushing this forward? I mean, renewable energy makes so much sense. You've got companies out there willing to invest in it. The government doesn't have to invest in it. And why isn't this being pushed forward? Really hard. I mean, not just talking about goals in 10 years' time. There's people out there willing to do this right now. Is the hold up Nova Scotia Power, or is it the province?
Well, first of all, we're not talking about, we're talking about quite an aggressive target for 2015. And as a way to get there, the province has outlined targets that Nova Scotia Power must meet in 2011, 2013, and 2015. So we are moving aggressively, but we also have to balance that with the question of affordability. We have to balance that with a question of learning to use a new technology such as wind, and how to balance it in the system. So most of the people that we've talked to in the industry agree that our targets are aggressive, but they're responsible.
Are there going to be floating targets, same as emission standards, as they change the goals on the government? The NDP government just recently changed, dropped for Nova Scotia Power, which Nova Scotia Power requested. Is the same thing going to apply to this? So the renewable energy will be shoved out again further if Nova Scotia Power decides they don't want to do it, or they say it's too expensive for them to do it, or whatever other excuse they come up with?
Yeah, I'd just like to back up a minute, because that was an important issue and an important decision that the government made. First of all, as you'll be aware, fuel is not Nova Scotia Power doesn't earn additional money based on fuel costs. It's really a pass-through. So it doesn't increase the money Nova Scotia Power earns to pay more or less for their fuel. I think when Nova Scotia Power came out with an assessment of what their fuel costs would be for next year, and the impact on rates on some industrial customers, that looked to be about 18%. And for average consumers, that turned out to be about 12%. And the government heard from large industrial consumers about the size of the increase, but also heard from groups representing low-income consumers, and also heard from small businesses as well, that level of rate increase was not acceptable. And so the government looked at the issue and looked at, is there a better way to achieve the same target in terms of mercury emission reductions in a way that's more affordable for the province? And we expect that there will be announcements in the very near future where Nova Scotia Power will outline how it intends to meet those targets in a way that is affordable. One of the problems with the strategy that was being used previously to meet those targets was it was based on operating costs, fuel costs. So they were looking for they were looking for lower mercury coal, and they were looking for lower sulfur coal, and the cost of deactivated carbon, activated carbon, not deactivated carbon, that were resulted in operating increases. And as a number of jurisdictions were moving towards a lower mercury environment, those costs went up fairly dramatically compared to what had been anticipated when the regulations were put in place. And so what we're trying to do is to move away from a solution where the costs would continue to go up in a dramatic way to a solution that allows us to achieve the same targets, but that does it in a less expensive way.
Would that include, again, the renewable energy strategy?
Well, the renewable energy strategy becomes part of our emission strategy, because as the amount of renewables goes up over time, the emissions start to come down quite dramatically.
Exactly, and that's all the more reason I think that we should really, hopefully, don't change your goals on this as they did with the emission standards for Nova Scotia Power, because they come to you and say they can't do it.
They didn't come to us and say we can't do it. I mean, I think we've got to be.
Well, they did indicate that they're going to save $60 million a year.
That saving goes to that saving goes throughout the economy of Nova Scotia. That's not a saving to Nova Scotia Power. That's a saving to every customer, to every business, to everybody who buys electricity from Nova Scotia Power, because they don't earn any profit based on those fuel costs. Those are straight costs that go from Nova Scotia Power to the supplier of the coal, and the transportation costs and all those sorts of things. They don't earn money on that. So the savings of $60 million does not accrue to Nova Scotia Power. It accrues to you and every other consumer in the province.
Yeah, but Nova Scotia Power does save money because they don't have to meet these standards. There's no question about that.
No, I'm sorry. The savings is on the fuel costs and the deactivated carbon.
What I'm talking about here is if they don't have to meet these standards, it's money they don't have to spend. So they don't have to spend the money, they save money. Bottom line. Nothing to do with the fuel they've got at the present time.
No, actually, it does have to do with the fuel. That's the whole point that I'm making. It's not a question of Nova Scotia Power earning or not earning. The savings as a result of the change the government made results in savings to consumers. It doesn't result in additional profit to Nova Scotia Power.
Well, if they've got to spend money to resolve this problem, and then now they don't have to spend the money, it does make a difference to Nova Scotia Power. They will make more money. It's that simple. If you don't have to spend money where you had to spend money, all of a sudden you save money. And I was looking on the Chronicle Herald today, you probably read this already. Colin Gibbons of the UK, coal consultant, said that he testified that he could not find any evidence that Nova Scotia Power was even trying to negotiate the coal supply contracts, renegotiate them to a lower cost. So why would they bother? I mean, here's Nova Scotia Power, got a monopoly in Nova Scotia, trying to put the prices up again. This is the sixth increase they've gone for 9 years, sixth increase, sixth time. And here, a consultant has come in and said they didn't even try to renegotiate the coal. Even though we shouldn't be buying the coal, we should have gone into renewable energy a long time ago, so we could have eliminated some of this at least. And then, where are we going with this? I mean, if you get a monopoly like Nova Scotia Power has, why doesn't the government push them harder for renewable energy? I mean, most of the renewable energy companies have moved out of the province. They've given up on Nova Scotia. We've seen a structure for property taxes on them that almost put them out of business. And then the previous government come up with a bill that supposedly alleviated that, but any new company doesn't fall into that. And it's a horrible situation. This has got to change. Nova Scotia, well, in Halifax today on the radio, if you're listening to the radio, is 89th in the country of place to do business. 89th. 89th. Both Moncton and Charlottetown are ahead of us. Both Moncton and Charlottetown. And Charlottetown has higher power rates than we have. So if we don't get power rates under control and other things in place and a better regime in this province, provincial government, to help businesses grow here, we're going to have no jobs. We can't survive without private industry. We cannot survive in this province without private industry. And you can defend Nova Scotia Power all you want with the rate increases they've done. And I'm a little bit shocked about that, because the fact is this province is supposed to be trying to help promote lower cost energy, cleaner energy. Because by moving those goals, did anyone ever do an analysis to see if these mercury goals that have been changed and the sulfur content in the air, how it's affected our healthcare system, which the cost is growing exponentially? exponentially is growing in this province. Soon we're not going to have anything in the province to pay for. You won't have to worry about your department being there. There's going to be no money to operate it. You want to really seriously look at this. And when the government drops these standards down and allows Nova Scotia Power to continue with this, it makes you wonder what's going on. And, you know, we look at this appliance buyback thing that they did, which I understand is only an HRM from Nova Scotia Power. It's not a bad idea. But why would a power company do that? Well, they did it because they're getting paid by the consumer to do it. They're not doing it because they want to save energy, because Nova Scotia Power is a company that makes money selling energy. Not saving energy, selling energy. So can you assure us as Nova Scotians that your department is really going to push Nova Scotia Power to put renewable energy in place in this province as it should be, and work with the companies that are trying to do it, that will finance it themselves, doesn't cost the province anything, and set a tax regime up that those companies can come here and they can work and provide lower, reliable power in conjunction with Nova Scotia Power, that consumers can be assured over the next 20 years are going to have a reasonable power rate. Because I can tell you right now, with the way the power is going up here and the way the tax structures work in this province, no company in their right mind is going to come to Nova Scotia. And that's going to create hardly any people. If it wasn't for the fact we had federal government in this province and the universities and the other things that bring things in here, this province would be in bad, bad shape. And the more I talk to businesses out there, the more disgusted they are every day with what's going on in Nova Scotia. So as the power rates go up, another 1-2% on the power rates, next year, what's Nova Scotia Power going to want for increases? And the year after that, and the year after that. We're soon going to be able to market here. And when that happens, we've got a major, major problem on our hands. So if we do not move forward on a solid basis, we're not going to be anywhere in this province. I'm getting really, really nervous of what's happening here. You're seeing more and more businesses close up. They're quietly going away and moving to other countries or other provinces. And it's just crazy. I mean, everything that's going on. It's really, really, I'm really worried about Nova Scotia. And I hope that you share this concern, because if you don't share this concern, as a deputy minister and your staff doesn't share this concern, we're not going to survive in Nova Scotia. We're not. Our debt is increasing. Everything, if you're running a business the way this province is run right today, we'd be bankrupt. That's simple.
Is that the...
You have a minute and a half left, Mr. Caldwell, so perhaps Mr. Coolican, you'd like to answer.
Well, I think in my opening remarks, I underlined the targets that we're setting for renewable energy, which are by 2015 is a firm target. We think it's an aggressive. We think it's an aggressive target. We've laid out in the renewable electricity plan and the regulations a way to get there. At the news conference when the regulations were announced, there were a couple of people there. One is the president of a local business that's involved in renewable energy and building wind turbines, who was very positive about the framework that the government has set for renewable energy. He indicated in his remarks that he had been on the phone that morning with someone in Europe who was questioning where Nova Scotia was. And when Mr. Barry explained to this gentleman the new regulations that were coming out, this gentleman said, well, it's encouraging to see that Nova Scotia is moving in the right direction. And in fact, Mr. Barry referred to Nova Scotia as someone that the world is looking at because of the aggressive targets that we've set, because of the policy that we put in place to encourage renewable energy, and because of the regulations that we put in place. There was also at that news conference
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the time's elapsed for the Liberal caucus, and I'd like to turn the questioning over to the Conservative caucus. Perhaps they'll want to pick up on the same point you're at, but I do apologize for interrupting you. Mr. Clark, is that right, for the Conservative caucus, the next 20 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and indeed I will try to pick up on some of the points that my honourable colleague has raised. And as you recall, Madam Chair, the last time our good witnesses were here before the committee, we recall that the Premier went up the Pictou Mountain to see all he could see with great fanfare and great expense to the taxpayers to announce a strategy and a plan for renewables. And where we find ourselves months later, and at the last meeting we talked about how they called it a strategy, but I recall that I was concerned that there were no numbers, there was no costing, there was no specific timelines. What we have are what the government calls targets. We don't have a goal or objectives, we have targets. We want to meet by certain dates and time, which leaves it pretty wide open for the government to try and stumble through a lot of process and at some point hopefully come to the promised land of meeting those targets. But we don't have a plan. And I think that's what Mr. Caldwell was talking about in part, that there is no plan that the government set forward. And even in the presentation today by the Department of Energy, we have some words on paper but no specifics with regards to numbers. You know, you can set a target, but what follows that target? What are the objectives? What are the plans? And if there are there, they have not been presented in a formal way that we have seen. And that leads to some of the other public confusion because, as we indicated, we now have a process that's going to increase rates for consumers in this province, both household and commercial, under the fuel adjustment mechanism. And I don't think it was ever meant to be a secretive process because we don't know what's going on behind closed doors right now about information that's being shared or disseminated because, as evidenced, we don't have the benefit of that information and what case that Nova Scotia Power is making as a result of a fuel adjustment mechanism. We know consumers are getting demand-side management charges added to them. Costs are going up. And at the same time, the understanding of the public of what is going on by government, the regulator, and the utility is getting more confused. And as the deputy had indicated, the Department of Energy likes to consult with the board, the utility, consultants, environmental interests, and customers. And what's interesting, it's probably not deliberate, but customers are last. And rather than a process that puts the customer first, this government is consulting with everyone else when it gets down to the end user and indeed the provider of the resources that come. So there's something that is missing here, and the reason why it's very difficult to address some of these things is the fuel adjustment mechanism, as the member, Mr. Caldwell, talked about, had legitimate points. Because in the previous process with the UARB, we found out it was Nova Scotia Power's incompetence or lack of planning that they didn't properly purchase coal a proper way. It drove up costs by the millions, and the utility wanted to transfer that to the public. So in fairness, it's not just about costs going up, it's about not knowing where the utility is in what they're doing. Are they being prudent? Are they being astute with management of that? And we also see a process where the government had to cave on mercury emissions for international coal coming in at a premium, yet when there was a domestic supply through the Donkin Reserve and what Xstrata was trying to do in terms of mixed use, it was a no-go. A company willing to spend over $300 million to open up a domestic coal supply and recognizing that if it would get an okay, they would invest in the washing process and the mixing of coals and a number of things that would make sense to do that. But that was pushed aside until an imminent concern comes up and the utility and government then cave and try to come to some other outcome. But that wasn't strategic. That was necessary because they had no other recourse. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a strategy because the strategy was to say no to it. So that's impacting the consumers in the province of Nova Scotia. And now we have what I find interesting in all the presentations is traditional power generation is dirty, it's costly, it's inefficient. Yet we don't talk about clean coal technologies. We don't talk about how at Point Oconee on Cape Breton Island, we have one of the cleanest burning power plants in the country. Across the harbour from Lingan, admittedly the dirtiest polluter in the country. But it goes to highlight, but we need that power. So therefore, we're putting up with it, and emissions are part of what we have to contend with because we need a reliable, consistent, major flow of power. And as highlighted, renewables present some challenges. But what I don't hear the government talking about is clean coal technologies, recognizing we're a resource base, a province that's been built on resources, yet walking away from what may be a very efficient and reliable long term. And we know the United States has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in clean coal technology because of their reserves. And we also know that the utility has a long-term commitment because it would be illogical to walk away from those plants that provide consistent, reliable power. So that's a component of the challenge. Now we get into renewables, and we have all this fanfare, whether it's the Premier going up on the Pictou Mountain to declare at great cost to the taxpayers all this great insight they have, which they don't, and then we go to the Trenton Works plant where we have Daewoo, which is great, coming in, and we talk about building wind turbines. Yet then we have companies in this province that are willing to partner, and I complimented the Minister of Energy the day it was announced about the fuel adjustment mechanism and heralded that was a good next step. It was very important. Then we have communities coming together with outside investors willing to put hundreds of millions of dollars into this province and are told, no, sorry, the grid doesn't cut it. You can't do it from Cape Breton, or you can't do it from that region. Our grid can't handle it. We don't want to do it. It's not the Nova Scotia Power imposed one where, like Nutby Mountain, you wait for something to fail to pick it up and pretend that you're saving something when it looks like a strategy to starve them out and then take over a project because that was in the master plan of Nova Scotia Power or Emera. So what we have are communities wanting to deal with targets. So you set a target as a government, you set certain measures out, and people come to the public table recognizing that we need the long-term benefit. We need to move to renewables. No one disputes the merit and the value and the prudence of going in that direction. But when people step up to the plate as they are now, and people coming to the Liberal caucus and our caucus after the government doors have shut on them, saying, what's with this? In Ontario, in the United States, they welcome us in the door. In Nova Scotia, they're telling us you're taking up our time, and you know what, you're wasting valuable time in having a meeting. So, Deputy, what is the strategy? And months later, can you give us more than just targets, but specifics that bring all of these things together to provide confidence to the customer, both residential and commercial, in a province where competitiveness is waning, in a province where we're driving business away from our borders? What can we say to individuals and investors that says this government, with its targets, have a plan that's integrated and we can see it?
Mr. Cooligan.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion the last time I was here, and I think there's still somewhat of a difference of opinion. The government has set out a very clear policy and clear regulations to set out for Nova Scotians and other businesses, people who want to come here and invest, what the rules are going to be for investing in renewable energy. And the feedback that we've received from that is very, very positive. It's giving communities the opportunity to invest in local projects in their area in renewable energy. It's giving small mill operators the opportunity to do combined heat and power projects in their facilities. It's giving First Nations an opportunity to do that. Are we going to tell each community what the project should be and where it should happen in their community? No, we're not going to do that. We think we should allow the creativity of the communities across the province to come up with what works best in their communities, and encourage Nova Scotians to get involved in meeting the targets that have been set. As I mentioned last time to Mr. Colwell, he asked me, "Are we going to meet the target?" And my simple answer then was yes. And my simple answer today is yes. It's pretty clear to us at the moment that we see a clear path to meeting the 2013 target, and we see a clear path to meeting the 2015 target that's been set. And I think it's the positive reaction of Nova Scotians, both businesses and community organizations, to the policies that have been set out by the government that are going to achieve those targets.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. And Deputy, with all due respect, you're not getting a positive response from Nova Scotians. You're not getting a positive response from business. You might want to read the paper today alone, or the papers, that reflect how the customers in this province feel about process and the lack of transparency and openness about the fuel adjustment mechanism, about the government strategy. So let's talk about, you say about communities stepping up to the plate. Well, communities have, to a door that's been shut on them. And we have companies and communities looking at, for instance, biomass projects, and I'll leave that to my colleague, that look at if there is going to be a process to deal with new page lands that have established road networks. Is there an ability then to put in wind energy projects so that you've mitigated costs, that you have an established transportation for maintenance, that if you're doing clear cutting, especially with a lot of downed trees, with the spruce problems, people think clear cutting is always negative when in fact it can be very healthy for the environment and for industry. So that while you're rejuvenating a forest, you can have positive impact from green energy, from wind turbines being utilized in those very sites and the very network, which is a win-win scenario. Whether that's building in Wreck Cove in those areas, whether that's over in the Mire, whether it's people. But people have come with money to talk to communities and First Nations communities that have come to look at investment and have money on the table, but they're being told about all the impediments and the reason why they can't do things. And one of them is the grid. It keeps coming up constantly. Nova Scotia Power tells them that, the department tells them that. So, yet at the same time, we talk about all the tidal energy that's going to try to be developed in the Bay of Fundy because it makes sense. We talk about Lower Churchill and subsea cable, and of course that will need infrastructure. But nobody in the government, Madam Chair, can give anybody any specifics. So I don't know who you're talking to, but I would welcome if the deputy would present and provide to this committee details of people in these communities that are saying, yes, this is working. I'd welcome that information. And I'd welcome the opportunity, because this is a great opportunity for us to follow up what months ago, as the deputy indicated, we talked about, but months later, there isn't one piece of paper more, not one number that's been able to be provided, not one good statistic that we can rely on to move forward. So I guess, you know, we've talked, should there be an independent system operator? Is the government talking about that so that the utility is out of that, and the wider objectives of allowing for community-based, for the feed-in tariffs, for them to have access to the utilities, not saying yay or nay, but in fact the region is saying that. So is the government at least looking at an independent system operator as a means of allowing for greater transparency and more movement of people into investing in projects, and indeed that the consumers will have greater confidence that we have a long-term, strong system with integrity? Mr.
Cooligan.
Thank you. I'd like to spend a minute or two on the fuel adjustment mechanism process. I'm not, I haven't been at those hearings the last few days, so I can't comment on the specific issues that are coming up in those sessions. But I can say, from the conversations that I had with customers and consumers first, in some recent consultations that we were holding, that the customers of Nova Scotia Power view the fuel adjustment mechanism process as quite transparent. That a number of them now feel that they have as good information about the fuel requirements of Nova Scotia Power and the decisions that are being made as Nova Scotia Power does, and they're able to participate fully in the discussions around the fuel adjustment mechanism. So that this process is working quite well. And I think that anyone who was involved in the process, such as the consumer advocate, there may be certain parts of the hearing that go into confidential hearings, but the consumer advocate as a participant in the process, or anyone else who was a participant in the process who'd signed confidentiality agreements would be part of that process. And it's a protection of commercial interests, not Nova Scotia Power, is the reason for going into that. If you allow me to finish, I think the member had a long statement and raised a number of issues that I'd like to respond to, and that's one of them.
Actually, no, I want to stop you for a moment. You can come back to those, Deputy. But you talk about a confidential process and people who sign off, for confidentiality reasons.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't talk about it's not a confidential process. The process is open, but at a certain point, the board has decided, not Nova Scotia Power, not the government, the Utility and Review Board, working with those other interveners, has decided that it's important to go into confidential meetings. But the whole process is quite open and transparent, and customers are quite open to be able to participate in it.
But Deputy, when you have a utility that is a monopoly versus an open market, which we don't have here, what is there not to disclose for the public's benefit of seeing those numbers? And that goes back to what Mr. Caldwell is saying. Like, why wouldn't that be available for people? Because, as I said, what we have seen in the past, when it's been more open and transparent, is the fact that we've been able to note shortcomings and deficiencies of the utility that they were transferring onto the consumer that actually were the shortcomings of the corporation, and they had to bear that cost.
But this is the same process, and I have confidence in the chair of the Utility and Review Board. He's the one who makes the decisions about the meetings and the process. It's the same process that has been carried on in the past, and it's quite a good process. And the customers that we talked to when Nova Scotia Power initially came out with its proposals for a 12% increase, we went and talked to customers first, and the customers we talked to said two things. They said, one, that the 12% is not sustainable and we'd like the government to do something. But they also said, when we asked them about the fuel adjustment mechanism process, they said it was transparent, and it allowed them to get as good an understanding of Nova Scotia Power's fuel costs as Nova Scotia Power or anybody else. They were very confident in the process and the way the process was working, and they have confidence in the process, and they have confidence in the chair of the Utility and Review Board, as do I. I want to talk a little bit about the independent system operator. It's an important issue in terms of how the system operates, especially how the system cooperates with other provinces in the region. And as the member may know, the government has been doing a lot in recent months to encourage cooperation among the 4 Atlantic provinces. And we are in that process. We are looking at upgrades to the transmission system, and the member may have noticed the letter of intent between the government of New Brunswick and the government of Nova Scotia and the New Brunswick utility and the Nova Scotia utility to examine upgrades to the transmission system between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and the upgrade to the system is important because as you move to more renewables, the strength of the transmission system becomes very important to support that. You need the larger the area that you're serving through this transmission, because of the variability, for example, in wind. If it's blowing in Nova Scotia but not blowing in New Brunswick, working together, we can help to balance the system in both areas, or vice versa. So, in terms of our strong move to renewables, that kind of improvement in the transmission system is very important, and the kind of cooperation that is being built between New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador is going to be very important in the future. One of the items that's on the agenda for those discussions is the creation of a system, an Atlantic-wide system operator who would serve as an independent system operator, and that's something that the government is in through this process of cooperation with the 4 Atlantic provinces, is looking at that issue. But the first step to doing that is an improvement in the transmission system, particularly between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and in the longer run between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, because the transmission at the moment between those 2 provinces is not doesn't exist. So in terms of renewable energy, that kind of improvement in the transmission system is going to be very important.
Thank you, Mr. Cooligan. Again, our time's elapsed, and I will turn it over to Mr. Wynot for the NDP. Just one point on the questioning, and I think that Mr. Clark, you had asked for a list of the consumers who were consulted who were feeling favorable, so we'll put that on a list of.
Yes, and I would like, Madam Chair, if they can provide for the feed-in tariff all of the details around specific projects or interests that's been identified. But I have asked about the fact that people are approaching the government and asking to presenting projects, and they're saying they can't be done, and I'd like a list and the rationale why they can't.
Okay. Our clerk will make a note of that, and we'll add a minute on so that you have a little extra time.
Could I just, that's not a, I'm happy to give you a list of the organizations that we've consulted with, but in terms of the community projects and the feed-in tariff, it's not the role of the government to say yes or no, or to close the door, which we haven't been doing, on projects that are eligible for the feed-in tariff. The way the feed-in tariff works is that
Mr. Cooligan, perhaps we could have that discussion at the end of the meeting when it comes to the request for information, only because the other caucus is waiting to begin. They have perhaps an entirely different line of questioning. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Wynot, if I could. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And actually, I'd actually like to hear the comment that the Deputy Minister was about to make. So you can continue if you'd like.
Very good. That's your choice.
Great.
Mr. Cooligan.
Thank you. The way the feed-in tariff, works is that we have set out the rules for any project. The Utility and Review Board is being asked to set the feed-in tariff. So for a project, how much is that project going to be paid for the electricity that it supplies to the system? So, for example, the Utility and Review Board will look at, for small-scale wind projects, what are the costs likely to be? What's a reasonable return in addition to those costs to allow the project to go forward? That will set a rate. Then the project, the community project, can begin, subject to the policies that have been set, and it's not up to the government to say yes or no to this project or that project. If it is connecting to the distribution system in the area where it exists, if it's satisfied with that the feed-in tariff set by the Utility and Review Board will provide it with sufficient return on its investment, and they decide to go ahead, they go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for being here today. It's great to see this topic coming forward to the committee. I just want to make a few comments, and then I'll start asking some questions. I think Nova Scotians can be happy to know that, you know, the government committed to taking the HST off of home electricity costs. So in fact, this year, Nova Scotians are seeing a decrease in their home their costs by 10%, which is a positive step forward. I find it interesting you noted in your opening remarks around getting back to balance. You know, the Minister of Finance is using this term when the government talks about getting the finances back to balance, and it's interesting you note that you use the same analogy and same term in regards to getting our electricity and energy consumption back to balance. Also, I mean, Nova Scotians are happy to know, I know I've talked to many people in the constituency that I represent who've said, you know, Nova Scotia is a leader in setting these targets. It's, you know, hard targets of 25% by 2015, 40% by 2020. And Nova Scotia as a leader was, in fact, recognized by that in the international community at Copenhagen. Both, I believe, the Minister of the Environment and the Premier have that award in their offices. I mean, that's something that Nova Scotian families should be proud of. We in Nova Scotia have such great resources, especially when it comes to wind and tidal. And when Nova Scotians travel to the beautiful island of Cape Breton, or they travel to up to Amherst or Cumberland County, I know I go up there often for where my family cottage is, and windmills are going up like crazy. This is just one step forward, one more step along our road to get our energy consumption back to balance. So I'm glad to hear you say those sorts of things. So I do want to touch a little bit about, I'd like you to tell us more about the public consultation process around the renewable energy regulations and how the Department of Energy ensured that the feedback was considered in developing these regulations.
Great, thank you very much. Certainly, I think as I've traveled the province and noticed the same thing as the member has of the number of wind turbines that are going up. I recently had the opportunity to visit another mountain, Nutby Mountain, and stood in the tower of a wind turbine that was being commissioned, and it was up to 1 megawatt of production. There was a good wind that day. And if it had been fully commissioned, it would be producing 2.2 megawatts of electricity given that wind. And it brings a certain reality to what we're talking about, that these aren't just goals that are for 15, 20 years from now. They're actually targets that we're in the process of achieving now. And it's being done by Nova Scotia companies. It's being done by some companies from outside Nova Scotia who are investing in the province, and that's good to see. In terms of the regulations, when we released the regulations in the early part of the summer, late spring, we invited Nova Scotians to participate in the process. We asked people to submit their views to us in writing. We held meetings across the province, and I don't have the details on every meeting and the numbers that came out, but we had a very positive response, and I'd be happy to get information to the member about the number of people and the different interest groups who were there. But we've had a good and engaged conversation with a number of different groups across the province. We met with the owners of mills in the province because they had a concern that the way the community feed-in tariff was set up, that it would not allow them to participate in combined heat and power developments. And so we changed the regulations to enable them to participate in that because it makes their operations more efficient. It's from an environmental efficiency point of view, the combined heat and power is also a more efficient way to make electricity rather than direct firing of biomass. And so it was an important step that we took in response to the feedback that we heard. The other thing that I should mention is that we invited also feedback from First Nations, and the Mi'kmaq indicated to us that they weren't ready for that consultation over the summer, and so we gave them a commitment that we were willing to enter into consultations with them this fall, which has begun, and that we would make further changes to the regulations if we came to an agreement on changes that were necessary, because the government feels that it's important that First Nation communities as well as other communities be able to participate in the increase of renewable energy. So we expect to be coming back with further changes to the regulations. The other thing I might add is that the people that we talk to in the communities about, and the companies that are involved in doing renewable projects, talk about the learning, talk about this is a new area for them, for the province. In many cases, they're new industries, and they want to make sure that we remain open to changes as we learn what's happening. And our department is certainly going to monitor the success of the community feed-in tariff because we're learning, as was mentioned by one of the participants at the news conference. The community feed-in tariff is something, the name ComFit is a made in Nova Scotia name because there's nothing like it anywhere else that we're aware of. So it's a unique contribution of Nova Scotia to the development of renewable energy on a community basis.
Thank you. So would you say that the government of Nova Scotia is listening to Nova Scotia families and businesses?
Yes, I think the changes that were made to the regulations after the consultations indicate a willingness of the government to listen. I would say also that when the initial proposal for a 12% increase in the fuel as a result of the fuel costs, that the government listened to low-income customers, to small businesses, as well as to the large businesses on which a lot of employment in this province depends.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the goals that were outlined in the renewable energy plan. So can you tell us a little bit about that, some of the goals that were outlined, and also what the province has done since then regarding creating green jobs and growing the economy in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, certainly. The largest objective of the renewable electricity plan is the target for 25% renewable by 2015, which, as I indicated, the province is on a track to meet that target. And we've also set a goal of 40% renewable by 2020. And as we learn over the next few years from the kinds of responses that we're getting to the targets and goals and to development, we'll begin to zero in on a plan for the 2020 goal, as we've set a plan for the 2015 target. The other goals that or targets that we set in that is that we set out for the larger renewable projects, which are important to help us to balance the costs of doing this, as the larger projects can be brought in at a lower cost. And we've set out 300 megawatts for Nova Scotia Power through its process with the UARB, and we set out 300 megawatts for independent power producers through a competitive process that the government will manage through a renewable electricity administrator. So we've taken in the past, Nova Scotia Power has made the decisions through the competitive process, and now it'll be the government that makes it. I'm being told it's 300 gigawatt hours, not 300 megawatts, but just a learning. And what we hope to do at the end of the process is to see if we can do a better comparison between which is the most effective and cost-effective way to achieve our renewable targets, and we'll take that learning forward into the 2020 timeframe. The other target that we set was 100 megawatts from community projects. Was it megawatts or gigawatts? Megawatts.
That's not a fixed target.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what we're not saying that if community projects come in at 120 is that will be okay. It's not a fixed limit. And those projects will be subject to a feed-in tariff, which we think will help those projects to get off the ground. So those are the various targets that we've set. In terms of green jobs, I think there was mention made to DSME and their development, and the Premier is in Korea at the moment. Has had meetings with DSME, and I think the letter of intent that's been signed between DSME and Nova Scotia Power indicates the support for the green jobs in Trenton. Our department has also we've had a business and technology group in the department that has been for the past number of years focused on how do you get oil and gas or jobs from supporting the oil and gas sector. And that group is starting to look not just at the oil and gas sector, but it's starting to look at the renewable energy sector, and has recently completed a study on where some of the opportunities are, not just in Nova Scotia, but in other parts of the country. And it's interesting when you recently had a meeting with an American company that is interested in investing in offshore wind development. And when they talk about the skill sets that they're looking for to help install their facilities, to help construct their facilities, it's the same skill set that Nova Scotia companies have developed dealing with the marine environment for the oil and gas sector. Cherubini is a good example of that, where they've done some work on the open hydro Nova Scotia Power tidal turbine that's been put in the water, because the skills they've developed in the offshore industry also apply to certain aspects of the renewable industry.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you about how high have electricity prices gone up over the past 10 years as a result of fossil fuel prices?
Well, it's difficult to do an exact calculation of what's the responsibility of fossil fuel prices, but if we look at the fuel requirements for Nova Scotia Power, it's about 40 to 50% of their revenue requirement. So if you look at the increases over the last number of years, now a portion of that is natural gas. It's which is carbon, but it's not solid fuel. It's not coal. So you'd have to separate that out. But certainly it's a significant portion of the costs. And when you look at the fuel adjustment mechanism and the impact that's having on rates, that's as a result of the cost of coal, and it's a result of some of the costs of the additions that are made to help meet emission requirements.
Any guesstimation on possibly how much those prices have gone up over the past 10 years?
I don't have that with me, but I'll get that for you.
Perhaps that could be provided to the committee? Thank you.
So I guess in regards to those rates, if this plan wasn't put in place, how would maintaining the status quo affect ratepayers? If we had stayed the status quo, what would have happened?
Well, if we stayed the status quo without the move to renewables, I think we would see continue. Yeah. As Scott's suggesting, we wouldn't be able to meet the emission targets, or it would be extremely expensive to meet the emission targets. In addition, we see coal prices as going up over the next number of years at a fairly dramatic rate. When you look at the demand for energy in world markets, the commodity that is expected to increase the most over the next 10 to 15 years is coal, and that's as a result of the demand in China primarily. So we see continuing increase in the cost of coal, and as one of the members mentioned previously, that once you've invested in a wind turbine, the cost of wind is not going to go up. You've fixed your costs, because your costs are primarily the cost of capital and cost as a result of the construction. So it's we think it will have a stabilizing impact on rates over time as we move to more and more renewable.
Thank you. And I think Nova Scotia families would be happy to hear that. I mean, when I talk to people in my constituency, that's what they want to see, that not only is the government doing something about it now, which they did by removing the HST off of home electricity costs by 10%, but for the future, moving this province forward to ensure that price stabilization is key for them, because a lot of low income, not only low income, but middle income, small businesses, as you mentioned, every little bit of savings will help, and they can at least now plan their own budgets, both in the household and within business, to move forward in their own planning for the future. So I do want to say thank you for coming today, and it's been a learning for me to hear some of your comments, and I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wynot. And we'll begin the next round. Then we had 11 minutes for the next round of questioning, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you. In the summer of 2010, the NDP government announced they would delay bringing in the cap on mercury emissions for 4 years. It's the only province in Canada that's done that. Could you tell me where the direction came from to do that within government? Was it something initiated by the Department of Energy, or was it another department?
It was a decision of the government.
Okay. And the government moved out to 2014. It just so happens to coincide probably when they're going to be in the next election, and we can move that away. Nova Scotia claimed that it would increase the cost to people in Nova Scotia if they could meet them. But at the same time, Nova Scotia, what I understand from the reports we've seen, that Nova Scotia Power was already on a track to meet those requirements this year. Is that correct?
Well, the strategy that Nova Scotia Power decided to take to meet mercury emission targets was to go for a higher quality of coal, and to go for the activated carbon addition as the flue gases were coming up. What happened was, and this is something that meets the mercury emission targets, allows them to meet the mercury emission targets. What happened was that the cost of doing that turned out to be far more than had been thought because of other jurisdictions that are looking for the same strategy, so that had adopted a similar strategy. So it's the old supply and demand, about the only thing I learned in economics at university. And so as the demand went up, the cost went up considerably, and that was going to have an impact of a dramatic increase of 12% in the electricity rates for average Nova Scotians, and 18% for the industrial customers. And the government decided that kind of cost to the economy of Nova Scotia was not something that was sustainable. And so it set a different strategy to achieve the same targets for mercury emission reduction over time as was there in the first place, but to do it in a manner that would save the Nova Scotian economy in the range of $50 to $60 million a year. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a cost saving to the businesses of Nova Scotia. That's a cost saving to electric consumers of Nova Scotia. It does not accrue to Nova Scotia Power or its shareholders.
Yes, I understand that. But again, as I said earlier, it does affect the health of Nova Scotians, and those costs are growing exponentially. Did you have any input, or any government official have any input into this decision to move out the cap on mercuries to 2014?
It was a decision of the government. Of the government.
Were you asked by the government for any advice on this before the decision was made?
There were a number of officials in the government who were involved in providing advice to the government. The Department of Energy provided advice. There were other departments that provided advice to the cabinet who made the decision.
On this specific issue?
Yes.
And was your advice in line with what the government finally decided to do?
The advice I give to the government is given in confidence.
That's what I thought. Just so happens that 2014 is probably about the time a new election will be, and they can be clear of this by then. Your department also is creating a new section, which is Efficiency Nova Scotia. Is that in place yet? And how many staff would be in, when it's all in place, how many staff will be involved with that?
The Efficiency Nova Scotia was set up as an arm's length Crown Corporation, and as I recently dislocated my shoulder about a year and a half ago, I always say it's arm's length and the shoulder's dislocated. So it's not something where it's not something that the Department of Energy is supervising the staff or the number of staff who have been hired. But I can tell you that they have a number of key staff. They've hired the CEO, and then they're in the process of hiring now. They advertised for a number of jobs, and I believe that hiring will be complete by the end of the month.
Efficiency Nova Scotia would respond to you as Deputy Minister and the Minister, even though they're a Crown Corporation?
No, the Efficiency Nova Scotia comes under the Minister of Energy, but Efficiency Nova Scotia reports to a board that has been created. They don't report to me. The government will be making a contribution to help Efficiency Nova Scotia with non-electric efficiency projects. So if you think about Efficiency Nova Scotia and the demand side management funds, those are intended for electric efficiency projects to decrease the amount of electricity that's being used, and one of the aspects that's been talked about here is the cost to consumers, and the demand-side management program and the contributions that the Department of Energy and the government will be making to the non-electric efficiency will be invested in businesses and consumers across the province. So if you think about your own home, if you invested a certain amount of money in improving the energy efficiency of your house, the reduction as a result of that, the cheapest form of energy is the energy that you don't use. So if you're heating your home with electricity, or if you're lighting your home with electricity, if you are using electricity efficient, energy efficient light bulbs, you're saving money in the long run, and the impact of increasing energy costs will be much less for you, because again, the electricity you don't buy is much cheaper.
I understand that. I'm going to ask you another question. What energy conservation programs will remain with the Department of Energy?
Conservation programs, energy conservation programs will be run through Efficiency Nova Scotia, not the Department of Energy.
There'd be none left in the Department of Energy at all. It'll be strictly...
There aren't any in the Department of Energy now.
Okay. And when is the new Crown Corporation supposed to be up and fully going? What's the mandate that was put forward to them to do that?
I don't have a firm date on that at the moment. I can get that for you.
And what kind of funding is the province going to provide for that organization?
The province will be providing significant funding to Efficiency Nova Scotia, but until the budget is set for next year, I don't have a specific number I can give you.
Will the overall budget for Department of Energy and the new Crown Corporation exceed the existing budget, or does it now?
Well, the increase in demand-side management funds available to Efficiency Nova Scotia will be quite significant, so that'll bring an increase to the amount of money that's being spent on energy efficiency in the province.
And what type of programs are they mandated to consider?
They'll be looking at a range of projects that encourage the efficient use of electricity and other forms of energy in homes and businesses. And with no really set date or target by the government to set this organization in place, which is I think it's a very important organization, because we can save energy, like you say. We don't have to kilowatt hours that you don't burn, you don't have to generate, and don't cost. Yeah, I might just add that while the process of Efficiency Nova Scotia being established is happening, it doesn't mean that energy efficiency projects have stopped. Conserve Nova Scotia is continuing to offer the programs that it offered previously, and recently there was a new program announced for the construction of new homes, and also the demand-side management being offered by Nova Scotia Power has continued. So there's been nothing has stopped while Efficiency Nova Scotia is being set up.
And will Conserve Nova Scotia be dissolved once the new organization's in place?
Yes.
And when do you anticipate that's going to happen?
I anticipate the dissolution of Conserve by the end of this fiscal year.
That'd be the end of April 2011? Correct?
Yeah, I'm not all that familiar with fiscal years in government, but end of March.
End of March?
Yeah.
Okay.
I better learn that.
Your time's almost elapsed. You have a few seconds to maybe.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you for coming today and for some of the information you provided. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caldwell. And again, for 11 minutes, we'll turn it over to the Conservative Caucus. Mr. Clark.
Just to start, Madam Chair, and I know one of our colleagues may be taking the chair, but later on. Just specific with the Department of Energy and information requests that I'm looking for and the benefit of the clerk. One would be just all documentation associated with the renewable energy strategy, the targets, goals, objectives, projects, and timelines. That information would be available. Second would be a list of all stakeholders consulted as part of the feed-in tariff initiative, as well as a list of proponents that have approached the government to introduce a renewable energy project or initiative in the province. And the third would be any documentation with regard to the state of Nova Scotia's transmission infrastructure and any of the costings associated with the current grid, any new capacity or projects, and any regional projects such as the Lower Churchill project that they would have consulted on, and independent system operator dialogue and any timelines that they would envision. So I would ask for that information. I would hope we wouldn't have to have a freedom of information, protection of privacy, to have public money to go into answering something that the public department could provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clark. And Mr. McMaster, you have some time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And energy is very important for the area that I represent, because the New Page pulp paper mill consumes 10% of the province's electricity. 1/3 of the operation's costs are energy. And I can tell you, if we ever lost New Page, the Strait area would be significantly affected, and that would reach out into Antigonish, Guysborough, even as far as Pictou counties. Would certainly reach into Inverness and Richmond and Victoria counties and even beyond. So energy is something I think about a lot. And so I guess the focus of my questions today will be on renewables and on the price of energy and where it's going. And I want to say right off the bat that I'm supportive of renewable energy projects in this province. They create jobs, and I like to see our world moving in that direction. Some of my questions highlight my concerns for how quickly we move in that direction and what effect that may have on our economy. Because if we start to lose significant numbers of jobs in the province, again, our priorities will change, and they might become more like a developing nation would be, where if we look around the world, a lot of developing nations don't place as high a priority as we can do in this country because of our standard of living. If we look back, the first thing I'd like to get into is the input costs for energy. If we look back in the summer of 2008, we saw a spike in energy costs, and it was driven, I think from your remarks earlier, would concur with this, from China and other countries, and the growth that they had been, the path of growth they had been on, supplying primarily the United States. And when the stock market crashed and the U.S. economy collapsed because of the housing bubble, there was I think the commodities collapsed, likely because they predicted the U.S. consumer wouldn't be consuming as much. And so we saw energy rates go up and come down. Now they're going back up again. The rates in this province for users, they go up on more of an even pace. Is that because we have a system to smooth out the cost of energy for things like coal and oil and other inputs?
That's a good question. I think members will have noticed that over the last year, and I think Scott may be able to help me on this, there was a reduction in the fuel costs. I think reflecting some of the decrease in fuel costs worldwide. I think there was an over subscription to that refund, or reduction, and that is being recovered at this time.
Essentially offset the DSM charge last year.
Yeah. So Scott mentioned it was an offset to the DSM charge. So while I guess rates would have been higher than otherwise. So it is, the system is. Because of the fuel adjustment mechanism, it is responsive to changes in primarily coal and natural gas prices, because those are the two main fuel sources that are used. You mentioned the importance of New Page in your area, and I think one of the things about our renewable electricity strategy is that it is it is a strategy that will bring economic activity and development to all parts of the province. So the recent approval by the UARB of the New Page biomass project is going to have a big impact in your area, both in terms of improving the efficiency of the New Page mill, but also in terms of direct employment as a result of the additional harvesting that's going to take place in the area. And I think when you look at the wind map of Nova Scotia, it's not such a big deal in Halifax. I mean, there is some wind around, but also neighborhood concerns and that sort of thing. You see the wind projects happening primarily in areas in the rural parts of the province, and I think that is seeing some job creation in different parts of the province. So the renewable strategy and the importance of the community feed-in tariff as well leads us to a policy that will encourage development throughout the province.
Thank you, and I was very pleased with the UARB's decision on that, on the biomass. It will mean a lot for the area. And I've got a lot of questions here, and I don't have a lot of time. I guess one of the themes I was going to talk about, and I've kind of talked about it already, and I would agree with my colleague down the line here about the fossil fuels. The price is going up. They've dropped down, but we're likely to see a trend where they're going to continue to go up. One of the reasons why coal is going up in price is also because of carbon penalties. There's countries around the world, so there's really some man-made costs. Now, I can see the benefit in that because perhaps we're including the cost to the environment of those types of fuel and how they do cause damage to the environment. But we're trying to, I guess what I would like to do is try to balance that with our need to keep energy affordable for Nova Scotians, because we all have to drive a car. Most Nova Scotians are in a rural area, and even people who live in the city here, everybody's using cars. And we have industry. A lot of our manufacturing is moving to countries like China because they have cheap labor and they have cheap energy. One question I would ask is, do we look around the world to see if other countries, like say China, are looking at renewable energy?
Yes, we do. For example, one of our officials has been invited to Korea based on our expertise, all expenses paid, by the way, as a result of the expertise that we are developing around tidal energy. So we try to maintain contacts with organizations that do bring us information about international trends. And the recent CORE conference, for example, brought Ian Cronshaw from the International Energy Agency, and he had an opportunity to meet with officials in our department as well as with the Premier to talk about some of those issues. So we are watching what other countries are doing, and while we're not, our plan is not based on solar. There's a lot of evidence that the Chinese have taken huge strides in terms of the solar industry, both in terms of supplying components to the solar industry, but also in terms of development in their own country.
Do we know what the cost per kilowatt is to generate, if you were to generate it by wind power, what would be the cost per kilowatt?
I thought that's what's the answer that we'd get. It depends.
Yes. Is there an average, though?
It depends on the wind regime. It depends on the scale of the project.
Depends if you have a plan.
I can give you a range if you want.
Yeah.
We can tell some of the large, the initial block that we got was in the 7 cent range.
If you had a plan, you know that.
Ones are in the 10 cent range.
Yeah. Scott's telling me that some of the initial projects came in the 7 cent range, and now we're prices have increased and we're in the 10 cent range.
May I ask, what would be the cost per kilowatt generated by coal?
Again, it depends on what kind of coal.
Give him an average.
It would depend on the current coal price.
I would take a
obviously the coal price has varied over the year. Today it's probably in the 4 cent.
Yeah. Again, the answer is it depends.
Is there like a range or an average for the last couple of years?
I'd say 4 cents.
4 cents. And I don't have much time left, but I guess where I would continue to go with questions is I'd like to put on the record, I'm concerned about how quickly we move to renewables, if the technology is not yet developed where it's become as cheap as, say, coal. This is before any carbon penalties are taken into account, because I think we need to make sure that Nova Scotians have affordable energy and that Nova Scotian companies remain competitive in the world. And my colleague has mentioned about a plan, and I know things are always being planned, but I would like to put that on the record today. And I hope that we don't see surprises like we saw this year when the government backed off on its renewable targets because energy prices were going to go up 12 to 18%, because if we're not careful, we could do damage to our economy.
Mr. McMaster,
thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll move to the last round of 11 minutes, starting with Mr. Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Deputy, thank you for your presentation. Inevitably, we've covered a lot of ground, and it's not surprising, I guess, when any discussion on energy takes place, it could lead virtually anywhere. But I do want to go back and ask you some things that occurred to me on the basis of some comments that you made in the first round of questioning in response to my friend, Mr. Glavine. And I want to start with the comment that you made that we have to learn how to manage wind in the system. It seems clear that as we move towards greater reliance on renewables in Nova Scotia, that's going to mean wind. And I appreciated your comment, but I'm wondering if you could really explain what you actually meant by that we have to learn how to manage wind in the system. Are you talking about physical changes to the transmission and distribution system, or are you talking about switching back and forth, or both? Could you explain a bit more about what you meant?
Yeah, maybe it was a personal comment that I have to learn more about wind in the system. But I think there's a lot of conversation in the industry about the industry is used to sources of energy that are constant, and you kind of turn it on and it stays on. And if you think about a coal plant, it takes time to get it going, and once it gets going, you got to keep it. It's better if you keep it going. Nuclear is even more so in terms of a nuclear plant. It's very expensive to turn it off and get it up and running again. Gas-fired is easier to go up and down, and in this province we have the facility at Wreck Cove that was built primarily to serve Sydney Steel, because when the arc furnace went on, it required a significant load right away, and you couldn't do that with coal. So Wreck Cove was built as a hydro facility to provide that instant load. And so dealing with wind is, because wind is so variable, it becomes a question of balancing the system. And I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that the question of power quality and balancing the system to make sure that you've got electrons where you need them is incredibly important to the overall operation of the system, and having power on when you need it. There are questions that are being asked about the capability of the distribution system and the transmission system, and whether or not there will be upgrades required as we ramp up the amount of wind. But I think, as I mentioned, we're learning, so that we don't know yet all the answers to that. The other area that is being investigated is the so-called smart meter, and the impact that will have on people's lives and the way they use energy in their home. And is there a way that you can encourage behavior that works with with the wind as opposed to against the wind when you're using energy. There are all kinds of questions about, in the longer run, if the automotive industry moves to electric, do cars become part of the storage system where you're storing energy through your automobile battery while the wind is blowing, or when the load is lower on the rest of the system? So there are all kinds of those sorts of issues that are being talked about now that get to the question that you're asking.
I think this question of the capacity of the overall grid, including all the transmission and distribution system, is an important one, because looking ahead, if significant alterations are needed, it'll be a capital cost, and it'll have to be sorted out either for Nova Scotian customers alone or for a combination of provinces together if there are interprovincial hookups to sort out. And I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about, even if there are general order of magnitude estimates of what number of dollars might be involved, or whether that process is just at such an early stage that we just don't know.
Yeah, there are some. In terms of a general improvement, I think it's too early to say. In terms of the New Brunswick, Nova Scotia improvements, they're talking about 500. Yeah, that would be in the $300 million range for those improvements. If you talk about the connection to Newfoundland and Labrador, that project you're looking at $1.2 billion. But it's also important to remember that some of these projects, by improving the transmission system and the ability of the systems to work together, we may be able to create some efficiencies that will reduce costs in other ways. So if you're running a system where you're taking the lowest cost, best environmental performance source of energy, and you're just looking at Nova Scotia, your opportunities for savings may be limited. If you're looking at a larger system that includes New Brunswick, the opportunities for savings both on the New Brunswick side and the Nova Scotia side may be greater, because you can call on the lowest cost, best environmental performance. So there are a lot of issues to be worked through before we get there, but it may create some savings. But you need the improvements to the transmission system to be able to do that.
Yes, and the projected costs for the New Brunswick connection and a potential Newfoundland connection is because there would be increased capacity. Is that right?
Sorry?
The reason that there are fairly large numbers of dollars potentially associated with the interprovincial hookups is because they would imply greater capacity. Is that correct?
New Brunswick, it would double the capacity, and I don't speak for the government in New Brunswick, but there are issues in New Brunswick along their line for transmission within New Brunswick, which would argue that they need to improve their transmission in New Brunswick. For Nova Scotia, it will be less cost because the distance that we're covering is not so great to the New Brunswick border, but it's important in the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia context because we need greater ability to export or import because we've been close to the limit a number of times in the last little while.
Yes, I think the export aspect is going to be quite crucial when we look at that. There was a second point that actually arose from the questioning of one of the earlier members to ask you questions. It had to do with direct sales to consumers, and you were asked if the department had a view about this, and you gave a fairly definite no. And I've been trying to follow energy policy fairly closely, but I hadn't heard that so definitely defined before. I took the question to be one of wheeling along the system from an independent power producer to a customer, and so this, I think, was one of the recommendations, that is that the system be opened, of the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee some years ago. So do I take it that the department is now saying that they reject that, or they just don't incorporate it right now?
It's not something we're looking at the moment. I think some of the challenges that we face at the moment in meeting the renewable targets that we've set, and we have put considerable onus on Nova Scotia Power to meet those targets, so Nova Scotia Power has an obligation to serve and an obligation to meet certain renewable energy targets, and at this point, we don't see any strong advantage to the system or to the market by allowing independent producers to make deals with individual customers. Now, individual customers can certainly, as a part of this of the policy, can certainly generate its own power to serve its own needs, and we've also put in place a net metering policy where individuals can do that, where if you wanted to put a photovoltaic panel on your roof, and you could sell back to Nova Scotia Power for the same price that you're paying them, which is an advantage over the way the system worked until now.
Yes, I understand the duty to serve argument. It's a very important point. But actually, your comments on net metering are where I wanted to go next. So I'm not sure if you've answered my point. Could we hear more about how you anticipate, how the plan anticipates that net metering will work? What class of customers it'll apply to, and what rates, and whether there are limits on it? Could you just tell us a bit about how that's going to work?
Yeah. The limits are that it's within the distribution zone, so that from the point of view of the system, we're not going to have more energy coming from net metering than that area uses. So we don't want it tied into the transmission system, for example. And we put a limit of 1 megawatt on the amount you can sell to not sell, but it's to limit on what
offset.
You can sell.
Mr. Epstein, your time has expired.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our 2 rounds of questioning. I just want to note for the record that Mr. Theriault has joined us, member for Digby, and I also want to thank you for your presentations and for your presence. And Mr. Colican, if you would like to, or anyone of you would like to make a closing statement, you have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to come here, and there's obviously a fair amount of interest and expertise in the chamber around energy issues, and it's not all on this side of the table, I can tell you that. So we appreciate we appreciate the interest. I hope it doesn't just end with this session. I think a number of the themes that while there are some disagreements between the position that we're taking and the views expressed by some members, there does seem to be a general agreement in the importance of balance, in the importance of emphasizing renewable as a way to try and create some stability in electricity prices in the years ahead, and it's not surprising that there is that coming together of views, because certainly when you look at when we talk to customers, when we talk to potential suppliers of renewable energy, when we talk to small businesses, they come up with a similar strategy, and the IRP process that the URB conducted came up with a similar strategy as well, that for long-term price stability, it's important to move to renewables that gives you greater stability, to move to energy sources that are produced from within Nova Scotia so that we have better security of supply, so that the payments are staying more within Nova Scotia rather than going to another country who's producing the coal. So I think there's general agreement on those aspects. So I appreciate the time, and I hope we can meet again, but maybe not as soon as the last time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kulikin. Before you go, I just want to confirm that we have two requests for documents. I wouldn't want to characterize Mr. Clark's question, but he has tabled it, and I believe that will be transmitted directly to the department. And also, Mr. Wynot had a request for data relating to the rising costs of fuel prices over the last 10 years and projections into the future, I believe.
Comment that we won't require the member to go through FOIPOP, but there may be some principles of commercial, the ability to protect commercial information that we may apply to the request.
Thank you, Mr. Kulikin. We'll cross that bridge if and when we come to it. Thank you. We'll adjourn for a couple of minutes to give our witnesses a chance to clear the room. We have a couple of items of committee business that we will get to in 2 minutes. Thank you for staying. Everyone's still in the room, so we may as well get right down to business. At the end of the last meeting, there was a motion on the floor tabled by Mr. Glavine relating to the release of prisoners on weekends, I believe it was. We had, the matter was referred to the Agenda and Procedures Committee, and the Agenda and Procedures Committee met, and I believe we agreed to strip the motion of some of the more, some of its flourishes, and we went directly to the questions asked about data, to wit, which offenders benefited from these temporary absences, what types of crimes were they found guilty of, and did they reoffend while out of custody. So the Agenda and Procedures Committee is recommending, and you all have the motion in front of you, well, perhaps we should just ask if Mr. Colwell, if you'd like to move the motion.
Which one are we moving? There's two motions.
I think the first one relates to the documents, request for information.
I'd so move.
Okay, just for the record, then, the motion reads, the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures unanimously agreed to recommend to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts that a letter be written to the Department of Justice requesting a response to the following questions as stated in the motion of October 13th, 2010. Which offenders benefited from these temporary absences? What types of crimes were they found guilty of? And did they reoffend while out of custody? So we have all the motion on the floor. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. There was a second motion, and that was that relates to the need for a meeting. The Agenda and Procedures Committee amended that motion with unanimous consent. And would you like to move that, Mr. Colwell?
Yes, I would so move that motion as well.
And that motion reads, the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures unanimously agreed to recommend to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for approval of a supplementary meeting of the Public Accounts Committee with the purpose of calling witnesses, including Marion Tyson, Deputy Minister, Department of Justice, and Sean Kelly, Director of Correctional Services, Department of Justice, with regard to temporary absence passes being granted to convicts. All in favor of the motion? Yes, Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the motion, I'm happy to have this motion amended as well, if there's a desire, as a former Attorney General, Minister Justice, to be a witness to this, and I would hope that the current Attorney General would want to be part of that, and the former Liberal Attorney General, because we're referring to Burnside, and it was the former Liberal government that designed the 3P process, that put it in place, and you'll recall it was only until after a general election that it was moved from Burnside to there. So the institution and the rationale, so maybe if we're going to ask for staff input, because both the current minister and myself have had statements on that, but I'd be willing to be a witness to this committee and would hope that the current minister and former Liberal minister would want to do the same.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this? I wouldn't say it's a friendly amendment. But are there any other? Would the former minister would like to comment? Mr. Colwell.
Just one question on that. If the present minister refuses to come, and based on what's happened in the committee before the NDP government's in, and also when the Conservative government's here, my guess is that they will refuse to come. Then I would think the amendment should be, well, I'm willing to support the amendment, should be null and void.
Mr. Epstein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think we can support this amendment. I think the normal place to start would be with the incumbent responsible ministers and department officials in order to sort out where we are. I think we would only move to any previous governments if for some reason a particular point arose that needed clarification, or if there was a problem in getting the information that we needed, and calling them together seems just not the right way to do it. I think if we're starting something that begins to look like a more elaborate inquiry into a department or part of its operations, then probably the way to proceed would be with a variety of witnesses over a number of sessions. But I hardly think we're at that stage with this particular item yet. So I think at this point we certainly couldn't support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein. As much as I would like the spectacle of former justice ministers battling it out on this issue, I do think the role of this committee. The role of this committee is really to look at current policies, and if there is any need at the end of the next, at the end of any meeting that we might organize, we might move in that direction. But yes, Mr. Clark.
Well, I just for clarification purposes, as you know, offering to be a witness does not get into a battle, because you therefore are a witness, as the department officials just were. And I was willing to be a witness as a former Attorney General, and would think that for the purpose of transparency and public confidence about what ministers did or didn't know, and what is referenced in the previous preamble is an assumption that it's an issue of just the previous Conservative and current NDP